All right, Jim, our next question sent to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Matt in England. Ric Flair recently produced a photo on his Twitter of his insane schedule back in 1983 when he was the NWA champ. Yeah. Was this the norm back then when you were the champ, or was Ric Flair an exception? He literally had 2 days off in 3 months. What would his payoffs be roughly for that period? And I have the screenshot here, but I think you've probably seen this.
Yeah, I've seen it, and I've seen other on the NWA letterhead, the schedule of the NWA champion. It'll say January 4th through 11th, Charlotte, meaning he's in the Charlotte territory for 7 days, and then Atlanta TV, and then whatever, and it goes like that. Several questions there. First of all, yes, I've seen it, and no, that wasn't unusual just because it was Flair. As a matter of fact, to be quite honest, that schedule was easier than the NWA champions of the 70s. Because if you notice, there's a lot of groups of days there. And it was always, especially if it was a big territory like the Carolinas, and if it wasn't a holiday where the champion was coming in special, you would book the champion into the territory for a week or for 4 days or for whatever. But by 1983, there were less full-time NWA territories than there were in the 70s. So it wasn't unusual. All the champions worked almost every day and only had 2 days off in 3 months or whatever. But the champion in the 70s actually had to go into more different territories and sometimes stay for only a day or 2 or 3 rather than getting a week in Charlotte and a week in Florida or whatever the case. And by the early 80s, the NWA champion was more often than not needed at Atlanta TV, which in the 70s, TBS was not as big as it was by the 80s. And yes, the NWA champion appeared on the show intermittently, but a lot of times it was on video. They didn't have to be there live. By the time that Flair was doing that, he was live. How many Saturdays at TBS TV is written down there on that schedule? There were more of them. You can count while I'm talking, but there were more of this. So you had a situation where in St. Louis, every 2 weeks or at least once a month, the NWA champion would be there. That was on a Friday night. So a lot of times you're having a guy go from St. Louis on Friday to Atlanta TV on Saturday morning and then going somewhere else in another territory on Saturday night, being there, then hopping to another territory that week, and then going back to Atlanta TV. And in Japan and other things were figured into that as well. Does it say Atlanta TV or is that grouped on that schedule?
It doesn't specify TV. It's grouped in like Atlanta Sunday through Saturday. But also like St. Louis, it's interesting because it happens on here early part of 83. It's always several days in Charlotte, St. Louis, back to Charlotte.
Yeah. Because at that time, I mean, obviously the NWA champion's going to go to St. Louis whenever it's running and whenever they want him. But so you'd have to break up your run and you couldn't do Friday night in whatever territory you were in. You had to get over to St. Louis and come back. I remember one night that some way or another, they had this was in 1986. Florida was still operating and they had double booked Flair to defend the title in the main event in Raleigh at the Dorton Arena and in either Tampa or St. Pete in Florida. And both towns were going to do well, and they didn't want to give either one up. So when we got there to Raleigh, to the Dorton Arena, we heard this fucking story. And there was Doug Dillinger. He was, because he was still on the police force at that time. He had a police car standing by. What they did was they had a Learjet at the Raleigh airport standing by. They rang the bell at 8 o'clock in Raleigh, put one 15-minute preliminary match on, then put Flair in the ring for the world title match, which he went 20, 25 minutes. He gets out of there at 8:40, doesn't change, hops in the police car. They put the lights on and they take him to the airport. He hops on the Learjet. He's in the air by 9:20. They ran the show in St. Pete or Tampa, whichever one it was, long as possible. He lands at like 10:45 and they've got somebody to do the same thing at the other end. He's in the ring before 11 o'clock. In Florida to go another 20 or 30 minutes. And then he had to come back home. Somebody, I think Tully or Arn, somebody drove his car back from fucking Raleigh back to Charlotte because he couldn't be in it. So, I mean, that's the schedule was insane, but that's why the NWA title in those days was the job in wrestling, except if you were Bruno or going to be the WWF champion for 5 years or whatever. The job that everybody wanted and only a few got was the NWA World Champion. You would make more money than anybody in wrestling except for Bruno or Andre the Giant, but it was the worst schedule ever. And everybody universally, even Lou Thez at a couple of points, everybody except for Flair always asked for it to be taken away in the end because they couldn't take it anymore. So yeah, there might be 2 days off in 3 months. There might be goddamn 12 days off all year. And but you made more money, and then most of the time, whenever anybody lost the title, they took some time off to goddamn regain their sanity, but they were a lot better financially set than they were before they got there.
Yeah, Ric Flair wasn't an exception amongst NWA champions as far as schedule. He was an exception because he enjoyed the schedule.
Yeah, he never asked for he never said, no mas, let up. No, Terry Funk asked out. Jack Briscoe asked out. Dory Funk asked out. Like I said,
Kiniski asked out. Yeah,
Kiniski. They couldn't take it after a few years anymore, and they never saw their family. And Terry ended his run a little shorter because he and Vicky needed to work on things because it was affecting his home life, and that was more important, and they stayed together for the rest of their lives. But and as far as Flair's money, I mean, I can't, for that particular period of 1983, I can't tell you. I know,
but that's a period where everything was on fire. He's going to Texas every couple months. Dallas has never been hotter. St. Louis.
Starrcade 83 was that Thanksgiving.
Starrcade 83. St. Louis is still doing big business. Florida's still doing big business. And Flair's all over the place. So
yeah,
it was really a big year.
If I had to take a wild guess, oh, good Lord. I think it's raining on the Monroe brothers outside now. Good Lord, it's coming down. If I had to take a wild guess, I would say somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 for the year. Some weeks would be probably 4 times as much as others. Like the week of Thanksgiving, obviously, would be 3 or 4 times what he made in the middle of October. But overall, and in 86, when I did see and was aware of some checks, some payoffs, I would have to think it was in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000. What's that? 35 years later on the inflation calculator. Not too shabby.
It's amazing to think what someone like Flair would have done, let's say this period of time, 83 to 85, if there was a fully fleshed out merchandise mechanism for wrestlers like him outside of the WWE who were just putting together their whole protocol for merchandise. But imagine if Flair had had that then.
Yeah, and remember in 1986, there was no pay-per-view. Starrcade was on closed circuit, but there was no pay-per-view. And even Ric Flair didn't get paid any more than the rest of the top guys for TV tapings, unless he did a dark match at a syndicated taping. But TBS, you got $40. So you only got paid on house shows. TV was almost free. So yeah, he was doing $500,000 with no merchandising to speak of, no pay-per-view, and the promotion didn't really pay anything for television. If you did a dark match at a syndicated taping in like Gaffney, South Carolina, you'd get a real nice payoff because they paid everybody else $40, and they'd pay the dark match several $100 a piece.